Good evening. It is now 1 minute to 6, or half a minute to 6, or something along those lines, for the 6th day of book readings for Indie Author Week UK that I call Wine and a Book, and have done for 6 years. I did try doing Garden and a Book one year, and it was just as disgusting weather as it is now. It's supposed to be foggy. Thankfully it's not foggy, but it's not very nice. So it's also very cold. So hence wearing a bit of extra layer. So yes, so welcome to Wine and a Book and Books and Landscape. And I'm Amanda Davey, and wishing you health, wealth, happiness and entertainment. So tonight my reading is again from a piece that I've written for the British Cartographic Society. This time it's on the mapping of lichens, investigating air pollution impact on lichens and how that has had an effect on people's understanding of actually how widespread air pollution instances can be. Sorry, bit of mine went down the wrong way. It's interesting that in the initial stages, the mapping was of lichens for that were impacted by acid pollution, which killed or kills so much that it is devoid of any nuance. Either they're there or they're not. But more recent air pollution has actually been from a combination of different nitrogen compounds, and this is so packed with nuance that the mapping does need to be much more localized. So I put that onto my Instagram post earlier and have now added it into what I'm reading today, because that the nuances actually do, I address them, but not in detail. So up here is a card that I sell, if anybody's interested, of Rhizocarpum geographicum, which is known affectionately as the map lichen. So it makes sense to have it next to last night's edition of Maplines. This is not yet published, and I'm not quite sure exactly what state it's going to be in the new edition of Maplines. Hopefully it will be in, but yeah, so this is a sneak preview. Right, I have got some pictures which I'll put in. I'm going to do a screen share at the end. I'm far too flustered to actually manage to do screen share, read. So the pictures, there will be illustrations of the lichens and a couple of others at the end. So I called it Health Mapping, Lichens and Air Pollution. And I was talking to a cartographic audience, so I've got to explain one or two of the things up the front. All aware of the history of cartography will have seen Dr. John Snow's mapping of the 1854 cholera outbreak in London and how it was possible to confirm his hypothesis that one water pump was the source of the infection. It has an impact because it is visual. He produced several versions. So around 1854, cholera was rife in London. I have a horrible feeling that my great-great-grandfather was actually killed by a cholera thing, but they won't let me get the death certificate because I can't prove he's my great-great-grandfather, because of course there's a whole load of us, and the paperwork only goes to one person. So, haha. Anyway, he mapped. He had an idea. It was a water pump, and he mapped mainly to prove it. And the mapping got more and more sophisticated the more times he published it. It is a very, very famous example of health mapping and has influenced health mapping of all sorts of different outbreaks since. Another project that has had an impact on the public imagination is that of mapping lichen species to illuminate air pollution. Originally sulfur dioxide, SO2, known as acid rain, but continuing into the 21st century, mapping eutrophication, nitrous oxides, ammonia, and also global warming. The public remember the acid rain mapping the best because newspapers of the 1960s and 70s found it exciting to report on. Social media today is flooded with photos of lichen-covered twigs by concerned individuals worried if lichens are killing their fruit trees, usually generating enthusiastic retorts like, "That means you've got very clean air," when it isn't actually always the case. They don't kill the trees, something makes them flourish like that. Simon and I had theories, Francis had theories, but most lichenologists don't like our theories, so I'm not going to mention them. At least it means the air is clean enough not to kill them all off, as occurred at the height of the acid rain in intensely polluted areas. The impact of pollution on lichens, which are symbiotic organisms of a fungus joined with an alga or cyanobacteria, and probably the old yeast, they're reliant on water and photosynthesis. The impact from smoke and industry has long been known. Notes about Manchester date from 1859 and Newcastle on Tyne from 1879, where woodland out of the city had lost lichens that had been present in 1831. In 1866, William Nylander, a complex Finnish taxonomist, golly was he complex, then living in Paris, bemoaned their lack in Paris graveyards. In 1952, a 64-kilometre transect run through Birmingham showed a loss of lichen diversity further out from the centre of the city than had been expected. Sulfur dioxide had been known as a health problem in city centres with heavy smogs and deaths triggered by lung damage, leading to the passing of the Clean Air Act in 1968 and the setting up of pollution monitoring stations in the cities. It's remarkably recent, really. A British Lichen Society, BLS, field visit to the New Forest in 1960 set things in motion, albeit slowly. Key species were far less abundant than expected. Parmelias were observed with blackened centres surrounded by a fringe of unhealthy growth dying. The day before the visit, a distinct smell of oil fumes and the flame of the Fawley refinery burners 5 to 6 miles away to the east made it likely that air pollution was responsible for the death of the lichens. Fieldwork by Dr. Francis Rose in 1967, newly into lichens, showed that there were areas still rich, and he became determined to investigate further. Being Francis, he did. The opinion was that the entire New Forest had lost its lichen interest because of the SO2 levels emanating from the power station. Francis took up the challenge to this dismissive opinion. He was really, really, really very, very proud of and fond of the New Forest and fought for its health and well-being for decades. He embarked on a regional recording of what was then called Parmelia caparata, now Flavoparmelia caparata. He recorded it in 45 grid squares in Kent and Sussex, finding it abundant southeast of the pollution limit. North of the Thames, it was hardly seen until Suffolk. He produced detailed maps in The Lichenologist as part of a BLS mapping scheme started in 1964 that followed principles in use by the Botanical Society for the British Isles and the British Biological Society. For a project to have impact, it needs energy and commitment. Once Francis and the other mappers got the bit between their teeth, they were roaming everywhere, looking for the nuances of the lichen species that were deemed indicators. Francis was by 1967 senior lecturer in biogeography at King's College London, so mapping was part of his world. His notebooks are packed, and I'm going to show a picture of his notebooks in the picture bit, are packed with little sketch maps as he worked out how things were progressing. Oliver Gilbert and Mark Seward, also heavily involved in the mapping of lichens and air pollution, were also lecturers. Oliver at the School of Landscape Architecture in Sheffield, Mark latterly in the Geography Department at Bradford University. David Hawksworth, another key name, has been taxonomist at Kew Gardens and elsewhere. And there are several famous books written on the subject. And so these four are very, very key people in lichenology and the study of air pollution and the impact of air pollution. They were very passionate, and each of them deserves huge credit for what they did and initiated. There were others around the world as well. Yeah. All right. On the 28th of January 1973, the Sunday Times reported a children's pollution survey which had sold around 15,000 pollution packets. This generated a mucky air map of Britain with 4 levels of pollution given. It was intended to be a generalised map, but concerns arose when the mapping began to be used in development plans or for retirement choices. Francis got perplexed about how to map a Morris traveller he spotted in Aberystwyth in 1968. It had 2 rare pollution-intolerant species growing on it, but he was unsure about which square to put it in. Nowadays, the impact of reduced SO2 has improved the health of tree bark since young trees of the 1970s are now in maturity. SO2 was pretty constant for a while. Other, newer and varied pollutants mean that using, this is where the nuance comes in, mean that using a 10-kilometre square is tricky as biodiversity becomes more nuanced. When I was researching in Cambridge University Map Library in 2015 for our book on the lichens of Jersey, Anne Taylor, the map librarian of Cambridge University Map Library, told me of a colleague whose daughter had a school project to go and find acid rain lichens. She had found none. Cambridgeshire, by 2015, as an agricultural county, had been suffering from eutrophication, and this has meant totally different lichen species need to be looked for to assess air quality. It is possible that that project was an opal study that ran from 2007 to 2019. It was a citizen science project with over 5,980 survey responses submitted for the air survey, including observations of lichens growing on over 12,000 trees and twigs. The aim was mainly education and skills, but there are maps showing a correlation between key nitrogen-tolerant lichens and monitoring results from equipment. In 2025, Lichen, spelt L-I-C-H-E capital N, a mobile app, was launched by the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, UKCEH, that uses lichens to measure the effects of atmospheric nitrogen pollution and offers a summary of air quality from its identification of lichens. This is more citizen science that may or may not be accurate, but also data collection, mapping how things have changed since the 1970s. So it's fascinating what lichens can actually tell you. So now I'm going to try a screen share. This is my first ever screen share on a live. And I'm going backwards. Oh well. Okay. Let's start at the beginning. And so This is a page from Francis's very famous in biological circles notebooks, showing his very characteristic handwriting and showing how he liked to do his sketch maps with lots of different keys. And this was for Parmelia sulcata, I think, although okay, yes, Parmelia sulcata. Not just in St Leonard's Park, West Malling, of course, because that's the whole of Kent that he was mapping there. This is in his papers. It's a map that shows 1974 and 1956 air pollution isobars. So obviously more intense in the centre bits and getting a bit less of an impact as the lines get further away from each other. And he's shaded in red where he believes the best areas for lichens. I think for Lobaria pulmonaria, but he didn't actually note it on there, so I can only presume that it's Lobaria pulmonaria. And this is a picture of Lobaria pulmonaria in Western Ireland. It's called pulmonaria because the old naming of things, if you were doing anything to do with herbalism or anything like that, if something looked like a part of the body, then it was deemed that it was God's way of actually telling you what to use it for. And the tree lungwort, as its English name is deemed to look like lungs. So yeah. Then this is a map showing, this is from the British Lichen Society website, and it shows the difference in Lobaria pulmonaria records from where are we? Let's go from 16. The green is 1650 to 1959. The blue is 1960 to 1999, and then the red is what has been found since 2000. So that you can see that the spread has not flourished exactly. It's a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful lichen to find. Then Flavioparmelia caparata. Parmelia caparata is the one that Francis used in the main to. It's got a bit swamped now with recent records, because since the acid rain was at its worst in the 70s and 80s in terms of the impact on the lichens. Things have improved a lot since then. This is Flavioparmelia caparata on tree. So David Hawksworth and Francis, and yes, they were the main ones who wrote seminal works on the air pollution. Oliver Gilbert wrote a lot of papers, and Mark Seward did a huge amount of work and has written a lot of papers. So that all four of them have been very significant in their output as well as their input. This is Lecodora kinesioides, and it's the most pollution tolerant or acid pollution tolerant of all the lichens that grow on trees. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. Yeah. So unsurprisingly, it's everywhere where pollution was worst. And then this is a map that was put into, this is a map that was in the Lichens as Pollution Monitors booklet, just to give zones to where the worst areas were. So numbers of lichens present, so 0 to 2 is in the black areas, and then 9 to 10 in the light grey. So again, that corresponds moderately well with Francis's wet red blobs, although Wales gets a better looking. So right, no, I want to get out of there now, please. Okay, right. So there's another. This is a Tenerife Lobaria pulmonaria up on the Inaga Ridge. It just has a slightly different look to it, but it's amazing to find. And this is a bit of fun, just while we're talking lichens. There's a lichen called Xanthoria parietina. I think this is Xanthoria parietina. It's a bit orange. So, but you can see where the eutrophication that it is enjoying has come from with the gull sitting on the rock. So lichens can tell you so much. And I have a booklet in mind on stories that lichens can tell you, because I can pull that off. I'm not a lichenologist. I've been married to a lichenologist, but I can pull off the stories because they're really quite something. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. Tomorrow are some stories about my mummy. Very talented artist. Artists can be complicated people, and so she's a complicated person, but all sorts of hilarious things have happened to her over the years. And I was telling a friend a few years ago, pulling a list together, and came up with over 20, and they are hilarious. And I'm going to call the little book that I'm going to do The Day the Bumblebee Wrote Off the Car. The car was sitting amiably in a carport doing no harm to anybody, but the bumblebee managed to write it off. So there'll be a couple of those sort of stories as yet to be completely sorted out. Anyway, in the meantime, wishing you health, wealth, happiness, and entertainment. Thank you. And a good evening. Thank you.